trustee and longtime library member, and it gives me great pleasure to introduce Sarah tonight and the book she wrote with Max Ritvo, Letters from Max, a book of friendship. Before we get started, I should remind you to turn off your cell phones. And I also want to say a word about the library. In 1754, a group of civic-minded people were intent on creating a public library that would be very useful as well as ornamental to the city, and so we remain. Useful as well as ornamental, and the oldest library in the city. The word society in the library's name has no connotation of class. Rather, it referred to a society or community intent on building a collection of books and making them available to its members. Then, as now, our community of readers and writers is bound by an appreciation of the written word in all its forms, and has been able to thrive these 265 years, thanks to your support. Keep it up. We don't want dust settling in the stacks. And now to Sarah Ruhl and Max Ritvo. Max was a gifted poet in remission from pediatric cancer when he walked into her playwriting class at Yale in the fall of 2012. As Sarah wrote, it was as though an ancient light bulb hovered over his head, illuminating the room. Over the next 4 years, as their lives took separate courses, his cancer returned. Their friendship flourished in a marvelous exchange of letters. Before Sarah tells us more about it, something about Sarah herself. She has been an astonishingly creative playwright since childhood, growing up in Wilmette, Illinois, when she started at the Piven Theater Workshop in neighboring Evanston in 4th grade. At Brown, Sarah earned a BA in English and an MA in playwriting. She also spent a year at Pembroke College, Oxford, studying English literature. She's the recipient of numerous awards: the Susan Smith Blackburn Prize, the Whiting Writers Award, the Penn Laura Pels International Foundation for Theater Award, and the Steinberg Award. She's a 2-time Pulitzer Prize finalist, Tony Award nominee, a MacArthur Fellow. She's on the faculty of Yale School of Drama and lives in Brooklyn with her husband and 3 children. Grass does not grow under her feet. Sarah has written many plays, including The Clean House, Orlando, Eurydice, and Peter Pan at 70. But Dear Elizabeth, a play in letters from Elizabeth Bishop and Robert Lowell and back again, is adapted from their more than 400 letters. This is a play about how friendship begins, how it endures, and how life would be unbearable without it. How true this is of Letters from Max. Please join me in welcoming Sarah.
Much for that introduction. Thank you for having me, and also just thank you for this building existing for all of us, because I'm a person who craves quiet and who craves books, and so it's a dream come true to me to stand in a room like this with other book lovers.
Is it drafty?
I'm gonna just ignore the fact that my backside is cold. Just warm myself with reading. So you learned a little bit about Max, who I used to have pizza with over a block away and talk about life after he was my student at Yale. And when Max was alive, we wrote about, 400 letters back and forth, and at some point decided to make a little book of them. And at first we thought it would just be a kind of manuscript that we would stitch together and give to friends and family, but as Max's acclaim as a poet really grew, and as it became clear that there was maybe more of a shape to the book, we decided to make an actual book of it. And Max and I worked on the book together while he was alive, and I finished it after he died 2 years ago. So I'll read a little bit from the book, and then maybe we can talk a little bit. Max Ritvo began as my student. I met Max when he was a senior at Yale. This is how he began his application to get into my playwriting workshop. Dear Professor Ruhl, thanks for reading this application. My name is Max Ritvo. I'm a senior English major in the creative writing concentration. All I want to do is write. His application said that he was a poet and a comedian, part of an experimental comedy troupe. A poet and he's funny, I thought? Huh, that's rare. I reread his application, which had been left to stew in the no pile because he'd never written a play before. And because funny poets are a wonderful species of human being, I moved Max to the yes pile, despite his lack of experience writing plays. It's hard to imagine now that Max's application could have remained in any other pile, a strange parallel universe in which I never met Max. Max walked into my class, and it was as though an ancient light bulb hovered over his head, illuminating the room. Skinny to the point of worry, eyes luminous blue and large, even larger under his thick glasses. His eyes, both magnified and magnifying, were especially animated after he'd amused someone, anyone. With a hangdog look, he'd gaze up from behind his spectacles to see if the joke had found its target. His voice surprisingly booming for so slight a frame. Some rarefied combination of a young Mike Nichols and an old John Keats. He seemed 80 years old and not from this century. Who is this boy, I wondered. He seemed to have read everything from Vedic text to contemporary poetry, yet he had the air of a playful child. The first missive I received from Max in my inbox began like this. Dear Professor Ruhl, I'm writing because before shopping period even begun, or I realized this class existed, I booked tickets for Einstein on the Beach at the Brooklyn Academy of Music for this coming Friday. Little did he know that I longed to see Einstein on the beach. I tried to get a ticket, but it was sold out. Nothing could have been more delightful to me than a student who had the foresight to book tickets to a difficult avant-garde theatrical epic. Max went on to apologize and ask permission to miss a class. I told Max that he must go, and I asked for a short report, no more than 5 minutes, on the experience of seeing the show. I said maybe he could join us for the first part of class, then hightail it to Brooklyn to hear the great Philip Glass score. Max wrote back, Dear Sarah, the show starts at 7. I'm worried if I leave later, I won't have time to properly get from Grand Central to eat something. The show is 4 hours long, and I have to eat in a really regimented way to keep my weight up as a result of the chemotherapy I had in high school. More on that some other time. I now had part of my answer as to why Max was different from other students, why life and death seemed to hover near him, why, beyond being a poet, he'd already contemplated the big metaphysical questions, and why he was so skinny. Max went on, I would really love to take you up on your offer of post-graduating advice. What days are you in New Haven, and when would it be convenient for you to be a sage for half an hour? The following week, Max, as promised, delivered an insightful, detailed sermon on Philip Glass. He was to have spoken for 5 minutes. He spoke for about an hour without stopping. I later learned that a bright young woman in the class was horrified that a man was taking up an hour of her time with Philip Glass. She was to become one of his best friends. In class, Max had boundless enthusiasm. He had irony without being cynical. And if he was aware that his brain made connections faster than most of his peers, he didn't show it. He just seemed happy to be in such good company. I met with Max after class at the local bookstore cafe Atticus, where we sat at the counter and ate black bean soup. Max ate slowly with difficulty and explained that in high school he had Ewing sarcoma, a rare pediatric cancer, which made his digestion iffy. He explained he was in remission and slowly finished his soup. Then he put his spoon down and spoke of his dreams of becoming a poet, resting here and there to speak about the trials of love. A girl was probably plaguing him at the time. A girl was often plaguing him. The semester wore on with more deliciously coined phrases from Max, like theatrical onanism and lyric complicity, and more of the same leaves falling on the same Gothic campus. Then in October, another email from Max addressed to me and to the teaching assistant. Dearest Sarah and Amelia, I write with sad news. Today was my cancer scanning, and an artifact was discovered in my chest. We are waiting for more testing and biopsy, but it's possible this is a recurrence of my cancer. I have every intention of carrying on with my work. I just wanted to forewarn you there might be difficulties on the horizon. I can't say how much you've both come to mean to me in my short time learning from you. If nothing else, maybe we'll squeeze a great play out of whatever comes of this. Gratefully, Max. The small class and I were heartbroken. A hurricane was about to arrive in New York City, and Max was about to go into surgery. The conversations Max and I had about art and life took on a new urgency, and our correspondence began in earnest. So that's the introduction, and I just wanted to read the first poem that Max sent me. We started to kind of exchange our work. He'd send me a poem, I'd send him a play. This poem is called Scan, and I think it's about the experience of being in an MRI machine, though I would love to confirm that with Max, but I'm pretty sure it is. Scan. Lie flat, comes the command from a voice I'm singing. The voice starts to weep, and I blow it kisses. And then I'll just read a little bit from, the book is sort of a hybrid of poetry and correspondence and, dialogue, and we'll read you a little bit of the dialogue bit. Sometimes Max would text me to distract me from nervousness before I gave a public reading. I'm a reluctant public speaker, shocking, or to enliven my commute to New Haven. These dialogues would go something like this. Sarah, I'm on the Amtrak quiet car. It's like my fairy godmother. Max, is it godmotherish because it transforms into a magically civilized place? Maybe death is an Amtrak quiet car, then we'd both be right in a way. Sarah, yes, but would we know anyone in the car, and who is the conductor? Max, I don't think you know anyone, but there are familiar dinner rolls. Sarah, that sounds sad. Are there books? Max, and the conductor is a reticent, beautiful Steve Jobs. Sarah, that made me laugh. Max, I think when you die, you are a book, so you can't read any other books. Give me some brutal feedback on my new poem. It's new, and I'm afraid it isn't any good. Sarah, because I'm so brutal. Max, you're not brutal. Sarah, you haven't seen me play ping pong. At my 41st birthday at Rosoteria in the East Village, there was a large group of friends and family. And at this point, Max was getting his MFA at Columbia, so he was no longer at Yale, he was in the city. Max came and we all played the Noel Coward adverb game. It's a game in which one person has to leave the room and the others decide on an adverb they will act out and have that person guess. Max had us all in stitches. Max gave me a tea mug with 2 fish on it. There was a lot of jollity that year, and his illness seemed an arm's length. We sometimes had lunches on the Upper East Side. Can you guys bear jokes about the Upper East Side? I would joke that the only reason to come to the Upper East Side from Brooklyn were biopsies, getting highlights, or lunch with Max. I often wrote at the New York Society Library, not far from Max's apartment. I would bury my nose in those old stacks until I disappeared enough to write a play, and sometimes I would emerge into the light and have lunch with Max. Dear Max, a little poem for you that I wrote. Lunch with Max on the Upper East Side. 1. The skinny women have eaten too many salads and have become to resemble their own salads. None of you are them. They need some cooked food and quick. You, a young man, also skinny, push the food around on your plate, but it's warm and it has the flavor of the poison medicine doctors give you. 2. The wildness of youth and the wildness of death, too much to bear, so close together, a big why called to God over ageless time. Some loop closed by old age, the droop of an old man's head, conferring a measure of acceptance, head already looking at the ground, thinking, when will a hole open up and I'll fall into it? 3. We talk of Madame Bovary and whether her emotions are banal, and whether the doctors are really not banal, and whether emotions can ever be banal, or if they only seem to be in art. Health does not belong to literature. I wish it did. Max is a poet. Max is a poem. We all become poems in the end. And then Max wrote back, Dear Sarah, I'm gonna cry. I feel like I have a toehold in the world through this poem. He was always deeply hyperbolic. Max. So Max continued to write poetry at Columbia. He had a book published, or a chapbook called Eons. and he fell in love, and he got married. Funnily enough, at the same place my husband and I got married at in Los Angeles. And Louise Glick presided at the wedding, and I gave a little blessing. And at that point, Max was doing really well. And then he had some bad news. And I met with Max after his bad news, I think, over there at the pizza place. So I'll read a little bit from that part of the book. I met with Max after his bad news. He told me he was afraid of death. I wanted Max to know he could talk to me about his fear of death, that I wouldn't be squeamish or deny the possibility. So I wrote Max the letter that follows, and the reply would come almost a year later. Dear Max, a letter, and fair warning, this is about the afterlife, so read on only if you wish to contemplate such things. You told me yesterday that you're scared of death, that sometimes you leave the house and forget your wallet, and you think that death might be like that sensation. I left the house but forgot my body, my house, my New York City, my fiance, my mother. The metaphor seemed apt, walking out of the house and forgetting, but not being quite sure what you've forgotten. I think I may have told you once about a dream I had that comforted me about death. I had a biopsy of some breast tissue that looked questionable. It was normal, but I was dreaming and thinking of death. In my dream, I was going to a Buddhist temple in India. The steps were high up and I was dizzy. When I got to the top, I saw monks meditating, and the odd thing was they were able to meditate with their heads severed from their bodies, lying peacefully on the ground. I found this horrifying, the image of the severed heads, but also comforting. The monks could still meditate without their bodies. In other words, their consciousness persisted. After I saw these monks, I saw gold Buddhas racing all in gold. I was going to leave the tower and walk back down the steps, all arranged like Legos, not glued in. As I walked down, the lapis Lego shifted under me and I faltered, falling. I was holding on to my daughter Anna's hand. When I reached the bottom, the stairway was gone, crumbled, and I apologized to a monk. And he said, "It's all right, they get it arranged newly every day." I'm not sure why, but I found this dream to be a talisman that made me less afraid of death. Once in my 20s, I was in a car accident on Hope Street in Providence, and we were blindsided, and I hit my head and conked out and thought, this is how death comes quickly. It wasn't frightening or unsettling, it just was. It was dark at first, and I saw a glimpse of how I would say goodbye to my body. It seemed like quite a simple matter. Then I woke back up. Sometimes I think my whole life has been a dream since then. The other dream that comforted me about death was about my father. I dreamed I saw him after he died, and in silver letters in the heaven it was spelled out, "There is no God." I turned to my father in the dream and asked, "But who wrote that there in the heavens?" And he said, "Exactly." At the time I was in Prague and reading the Brothers Karamazov, my father's favorite book. The dream seemed to be an answer to the questions the book was asking. That in the asking, the ability of consciousness to frame the phrase, "There is no God," there was an answer. I will pray to whatever God or gods that your body gets better, and if your body doesn't get better in this lifetime, I will pray that we will meet up and recognize each other in the next lifetime, where probably you are my teacher, as you once were previously. Okay? I'm waiting for Anna to finish her violin lesson now. In the middle of writing this letter, she emerged from her lesson and needed help blowing her nose. You can contemplate existence all you want, but at the end of the day, someone needs to blow their nose and hand you a dirty tissue. I wrote you a small poem attached. An automated recording from a hospital near you. For Max, an x-ray of your soul shows a general radiance, while the scan of your breath shows only poetry, waiting on the biopsy of your imagination, but we suspect it cannot be contained. Your body cannot contain you. You're way too wide for that. And if there is a Jewish heaven, it is here on earth on 13th Street, you shouting poetry in a crowded room, circling and wearing a pink kimono. Max he wore the most wonderful costumes when he read. He was not an introverted poet, he was extroverted and generous and giving. And at this reading on 13th Street, it was so packed, there was no room for everyone, so people filled the stage, and Max, in this booming voice, read to them, but circled in order to include everybody. So Max took about a year to write back to that letter, I think because he wasn't actually ready to contemplate the afterlife at that point. And sometimes when I read from this book, people ask me, well, what did Max think of the afterlife? And I thought I would just read from this poem he wrote for his nephew, which I think gives you some sense. And it's called A Walk with My Nephew, who is asked about being a good man. Heaven? Sure, there's still heaven. It's like this. A fish leaps out of the water and onto some grass by the roadside. He can move so fast out there without water crushing his spine. It's like discovering he's a guitar string meant to go faster than he'd realized. All the gut he is sweetening beyond reason into a note as his body finds its place in the silver flash that shuts out his mind out of air. Though there's more air now than he knows what to do with. It melts like a waffle cone. This isn't helping, I can tell. Take this pill instead. Somebody guessed just what life was like and then made a pill for it. It's my favorite, vanilla, I think. Don't you worry, all that scared old sweat will be washed away with fresh white new sweat. To see how we're doing on time. I'll just read a little bit from the ending and then maybe we can talk. Our letters became more fragmented as the summer days lengthened. I would send Max a poem, and Max on morphine would say, adored through my sleep and wake loop. I had the good fortune of seeing him many times over that summer. My work life brought me to Los Angeles, and I was grateful for the Fiji water bottle meetings in Hollywood, if only so I could visit Max. Our long letters naturally turned into texts or phone calls, or simply being in each other's presence, sometimes not talking, just sitting. He revised his galleys for his book and did press interviews from his blue steamer chair, his oxygen tank following him around. Sometimes he would text me about his upcoming book. On a bad day, he would just text pain or coughing up blood. On a good day, he would get expansive, saying, do you think books want to talk to us? I walked outside for the first time today. It was so hot I felt I was Moses in the desert, and I walked up a hill just like Moses. On a middling day, I'd say, how are you? And he'd say merely, upright. Sometimes Max would complain. He was not a saint, he was an artist. In fact, one of my favorite Max traits was his penchant for revenge in matters of love and literature. When he detested another writer's work, he would not pull punches, just as he would not hold back his ebullience when he loved a colleague's work. He had a series of revenge poems to an ex's new lover. He would say, revenge makes me feel very alive. Revenge is a dish best served cold is bullshit. Sometimes Max would complain about the need of others to say goodbye to him at his own emotional expense, but he would always do so with good humor, as in, today my childhood nanny gripped me in her arms and said, you are breaking my heart, Max, and then started to cross me hysterically. That was today's visit. Sometimes we joked about death. He texted me. I made some handwritten cards for B and Mom after I did die. And I wrote, even autocorrect wants you to live. Ha, he said. Max died that August holding the hands of his wife and mother. He was 25. The day before he died, he pulled his mother aside and said, that's it, I can't write anymore. He asked her, do you think I've fought hard enough? She assured him that he'd fought hard enough, always. Then she did the hardest thing a mother can do. Sorry. She let him go, and he let go. I dreamed of Max a lot the fall after his death. Often I'd wake from a dream of Max, and I'd be sitting up with a pencil in my hand, trying to remember it. In one dream, he told me the moment of death was no worse than a colonoscopy. I was having a colonoscopy that fall, and it was just like Max to make a joke in a dream, and also to be concerned about my colonoscopy. I asked him if it was hard to be dead. He said, yes, it's hard to be dead. It's hard not to talk, but I'm listening all the time. It comforts me to think of Max listening to us all the time. All of us who miss him have his writing forever, but we don't have his quicksilver, bold, loving, in-the-moment, joking presence. But might we still have his listening? And in having his listening, experience again, when we need it, his wide love. And I think I'll stop there and talk a little bit. Thank you for listening.
question.
Yeah.
It seems to me from personal and other experience that sometimes when people have made or in a hospice and have accepted the fact that they're going to be dying, that it's a great comfort to them to know about their survivors. You just got married and so forth. I just wanted to talk about that.
Yeah, I think he was incredibly worried about all his dear ones and how they would be, and he was always trying to comfort them. And I think that's part of why he was such a delight and pleasure to be around always when he was sick, because he was always thinking of other people. He would give them instructions. Here's what you should do after I die to keep yourself not grief-stricken. He would literally write out lists of things for them to do. It was quite amazing.
Did he have wishes for his funeral?
You know what? I have no idea. I don't know. Whether Max had wishes for his funeral. And his funeral was very small in Los Angeles with the family, and it was a Jewish service. And I didn't go. I mean, I think that was one thing that was a little strange or hard, was being his. You know, when you're a teacher, there's no way to mourn for your student that's sort of ritualized. You know what to do when you're part of the family, and these relationships between teacher and student can be so intimate and transformative. But I wasn't at his funeral. I did go to Yale, and we had a memorial service for him at Yale. Yeah.
I'm just thinking of this now. Dear playwright, would you ever consider writing even like a screenplay? Because he's such a unicorn. He's such an interesting person. I would love to see it done as a movie.
Yeah.
Do you know what I'm saying?
Someone asked me about that, and maybe a play. I mean, I think it seemed so intimate after he died. It really felt like it wanted to be in a book, which you could close, that was private. I mean, it's funny to describe a book as private. It's not private. Anyone can open it and read it. But being in the performing arts as I am, it's so public and so exposed. And I also couldn't imagine anyone playing Max. Like right after he died, that just seemed so strange and wrong. But the more that I read the book aloud, and sometimes I'll read with a friend, a poet friend, who will read Max's voice, I think, maybe Max might enjoy, having his voice more in the ether. I just think we live in such hard times right now, and I feel like the more Max in the world is a good thing. So, thank you. Yeah.
When did you decide to put it together as a book?
I think it was about 2 years into knowing Max, and we started writing in earnest. Maybe, I was no longer his teacher, so we were friends, and we were often not in the same city because he was either at the NIH getting treatment or LA getting treatment, but then he was working hard to finish his degree at Columbia. And I think that the tenor of our letters became so metaphysical at a point that it seemed like, well, maybe there's something to do with them. And Max published 5 of them in an online magazine called Berfois. So he was interested in making them public, and then I said, why don't we make this little book? And he said, yes, let's do that. And then we organized them by subject matter. And Max's publisher, Milkweed, that did both Max's books of poetry, said, no, we don't like it. Basically, they weren't going to publish it like that. And I had argued to Max that we should order it chronologically. And that's like, because I'm a storyteller, that's like the dumbest way you can order something. And sometimes with Occam's razor, like the simplest is the best choice. And Max said, no, I don't want it to be chronological. I don't want it to be like a Lifetime movie. I don't want it to be a cancer narrative. I don't want to be Cancer Boy. And so I said, well, let's just keep trying. And so we kept trying to organize it, and he was getting sicker and sicker. And ultimately, he told me, do what you will and finish the book. And so it was really helpful to me that Max's editor at Milkweed, Daniel Slater, who's a wonderful man and editor, helped me figure out a way to structure. And I felt like, because after doing the Robert Lowell Elizabeth Bishop project, I felt like what's so beautiful to me about their seeing their friendship evolve over time is all these details through time and how they accumulate. And I felt like to take it out of order was to deny the reader.
The quiet car.
The quiet. Yeah, exactly.
What did he finally conclude was the reality of what was going to happen?
You know, I wanted to, this phrase from one of his poems I also love in terms of what he thought the afterlife might be. Oh, that's not it. Sorry. It was sort of about artistic process. I feel like he had an idea of heaven that was about playfulness and artistic process. Yeah, he said, heavens are all alike, the people who make them are all artists. Which I thought was an incredible way around all the metaphysical difficulties. I mean, I think at his heart, he was an artist, and that's how he envisioned what would come after. Yeah.
I just, listening to you speak, I'm a teacher and I've been teaching for 40-something years, and I happen to be teaching Virginia Woolf's To the Lighthouse at this moment.
The best.
The best.
Yeah.
And I said to them, well, what is the question? Can you pose the question that you think this text answers? And the big question that they pose, and I'm connecting to what you said, was, what is a legacy? And so I love the idea that you speak of your text, because I'm reminded of letters to Rilke, to a young poet, or Cézanne, and these letters that actually reflect the unique relationship that is both private but confidential, and is boundary between a teacher and a student, and that you choose these sort of lofty topics that people don't want to speak about, which is afterlife. So I'm also reminded of your play Eurydice. So this idea of afterlife and heredity. So I love the form. I think it's a great hybrid form that you've chosen.
Oh,
Thank you.
Thank you. I wish I could sit in on your Wolf class. That's my favorite novel.
Yeah, that and Bovary for me.
Bovary, yeah.
Yeah.
I was going to say something. What was it about Wolf or legacy? I mean, I also feel like that novel's about what is consciousness.
Absolutely.
And I feel like Max was always asking that question. And I think the other thing that's so wonderful about your methodology of question asking, and what was so wonderful about Max, was the questions were always more important than the answers.
Exactly.
And Letters to a Young Poet, Rilke's book, was always deeply important to me, and I would carry it around with me in my 20s. And at a point I thought, well, what did the poet say? You know, like, was he so boring that we can't read? It's all Rilke. It's all his advice, and you never get the answer back, which I feel like has something to do with the ego of men in the 19th century. Or maybe they're lost. I don't know. I should find out before I make pronouncements.
Mr. Ramsey wants to leave a book, actually.
Right.
And he speaks of the alphabet,
Yes.
something concrete. And
Yeah,
Mrs. Ramsey creates artful experiences.
yeah. Yeah, he's always trying to get one more letter.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I was wondering if you might consider doing what you did with the Elizabeth Bishop, the Robert Lowell play, which I saw at the Lyric in Boston, and
Oh, you did?
just absolutely transcendent, and the
Oh.
whole audience was so with you and with, you know, and you brought both of them so to life, even to people, many people, you know, that I spoke to weren't even that familiar with their work. And I'm wondering if maybe with this, the play with Max, what a lovely way of paying tribute to him. And, you know, in our current unfortunate dark ages, to have someone like that and the relationship between the two, I just think would be lovely.
I should do it. I'm getting the message. I think, and I'm so glad you saw that. I didn't see that production in Boston.
It's beautifully done. Oh, so beautifully done.
Thank you. They're doing it in London right now, this play, Dear Elizabeth, and one thing that's really interesting about what they're doing is they're not letting the actors rehearse. It just seems so wild.
They're not good.
They're not rehearsing. So they're rotating actors in, and the notion is to see the actor experience the text as a surprise as it goes along, because I kind of stipulate you kind of just read it, you don't need to sort of perform it. And I don't know if I'll go or not, but I did that play at Yale Rep, and Max saw it his senior year and gave me a big hug afterwards and said, I feel like you wrote that play exactly for me. Which was so sweet.
No, that's right. And is it greatly produced in New York at any time, do you know?
Dear Elizabeth,
Yes.
you know, we did a small production at the Women's Project, and we had rotating actors every week. It was kind of also crazy. We did rehearse it, but they would open and have 4 performances, and then we'd start over again. And I'm torn about who my favorite bishop was. Cherry Jones was pretty wonderful. And Kathy Chalfant was one, Elizabeth Bishop too. But it'd be nice to have a longer run so more people could see it. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about how knowing Max or working with his writing influenced your writing unrelated to writing to him?
I feel like I don't know yet. I think it has, but I feel like the jury's out. I do know that I actually found it hard to write after Max died. Similar to when my father died, and it took me a while to be able to write again. I think Max, there was such a fluency in his voice, and there's something so comforting in having a back and forth with another writer who shares your notions, that I felt like that time in my life was very fluent. And I think after he died, I lacked that fluency for a little while.
I just want to say, I'm so glad you moved his application.
Right?
I mean, that was so stunning when I read that. Like, what would have happened if you didn't just, see something pop off that page that maybe someone else didn't see?
Isn't it good that I put his application in the yes pile? And I didn't want to throw the teaching assistant under the bus, Amelia, in my book, but Amelia had put him in the no pile.
What made you go back?
I think I went, because I let Amelia do half the applications, I just went back kind of to check through what she'd done, and I went through and I just thought, that's kind of, there's something about this one. I mean, he said, all I want to do is write. Actually, I want to redo one more little thing from his application in class, which I end the book with, which I just think, I mean, how did he know this at the age that he was? It boggles my mind. Right, so he was 20 years old when he wrote this in his application to get into the class. Give me some language and give me some listeners. Let them do monstrous things they don't intend to do to make them happy and unhappy. We're all just figuring out how to listen. I mean, come on, how could you say no to that? Yeah. And one thing that astonished me about Max was he loved listening. It was like a project to him, how to be a deeper listener. And so many people with flashes of genius just like to talk all the time. And Max wasn't like that. He could talk, but he could also listen. Yeah.
Are there any recordings of his voice?
Yes. There's some lovely ones on YouTube that his mother posted of him reading, I think, at Hudson Valley. And one thing I love is on the New Yorker website, he wrote this poem called Poem to My Litter. It's an extraordinary poem that the New Yorker published about when he had immunotherapy. They inject the cancer into the mice and give them tumors, and then they take that and inject it into the person. And Max felt so guilty about all these mice dying on his behalf. So the poem is about that, and he was too sick to do a video recording at the time, so they did an animated Max. So it's his voice, but with animation, and it's such a beautiful way to experience a poem. After seeing it, I thought, why don't they animate lots of poems? It's really fantastic. And other stuff. Yeah.
What are you working on now?
What am I working on? I'm working on an opera. first one, and it's an adaptation of my play Eurydice, kind of heaved up into opera form. And it's a young composer named Matt O'Coin, and it's supposed to come to the Met in a couple of years. It takes a while to get the singers, so it's going to be in LA next year and then at the Met the next year. And I'm working on a musical and a play. I'm working on a comedy about the Salem witch trials. I didn't know it would be a comedy until I started writing. I thought, I can't make this sad. I just can't. But this might be interesting to you. So the reason I started writing it is I saw a production of The Crucible, which I thought was fantastic production, but it really sexualized the young girls, and I thought, what is going on in this play, Arthur Miller? And I read it more deeply, and then I found out that he fictionalized, so a lot of things are true, but what he fictionalized is the young girl Abigail Williams, who John Proctor has this weird thing with. Abigail Williams historically was 6, and John Proctor was 60. So there was no unrequited love there was no revenge plot where Abigail Williams wanted to get with John Proctor, and when he refused, she wreaked havoc on his wife and all these other things. So it's total fabrication. So my play it's set in contemporary Salem at the Historical Society, and there's a descendant of Rebecca Nurse who's sort of a truth teller and just keeps getting shot in the foot. Whatever she does goes horribly wrong. That's what it's about. And hopefully we'll be in New York next year if I do my rewrites properly in a timely fashion. Any other questions or experiences or thoughts to share? Yeah.
Have you had dreams about Max since?
You know, the last dream, last really vivid dream I had of him, he said, "Life is swaying, go back to life." And it felt like a message to me that was really clear. Like, Sarah, you have 3 kids, you have this beautiful husband, like, don't be in mourning for me, go back to your life. And since then, he hasn't really visited in my dream life. But whenever I dreamt of him, it was so vivid, it was really like I was talking to him.
One thing that struck me about how you remember him was that it really was not a cancer narrative. It had so much to do with how affirming the writing was.
Oh, good.
And the Morgan Library did a wonderful exhibit and then series of seminars on Tennessee Williams, and it was called No Life But Writing. And even when he had his issues, you know, the writing was it was so life-giving, and it was to Max too. I thought that was a wonderful gift you gave me.
Oh, that's so nice of you to say. I mean, I think I struggled with knowing how strongly Max felt about that and really not wanting to make the narrative into anything he would not like or that his family wouldn't like. And I think writing was such a lifeboat to him. It kind of carried him through. And I thought it was so moving what his mom told me, that before he died, he said, "I can't write anymore, Mom." You know, that felt like that was it for him. Other thoughts?
In terms of the structure of the book, you decided to make the book out of your correspondence early on. Does it seem like the letters became much more expansive,
Yeah.
as if they were going to
A little more
a
intentional.
story, rather
Yeah.
than like the texts or, you know, a short little email?
I think they do get longer, and I don't know if it's after we kind of lay down our intention to write each other in that way. And I always thought Max was amazing because he was a millennial, so he could email and he could text, but sometimes he would write these long, expansive letters like he was on some 19th century whaling ship, you know, by candlelight. And so I feel like his emails don't have the tonality of emails, even though some of them...
But so some were actually written letters and some were...
No, they're emails,
Yeah.
really, yeah.
Yeah, no, they don't read as that at all.
Well, that's
Yeah.
good. Thank you all so much. You've been such a wonderful audience.
We do have copies of letters from Max available for sale from the corner bookstore in the gallery if you'd like to have one signed.